Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who is Hindu, reached out to top Democrats to ask that Hindus be specifically mentioned in the resolution. Other members have suggested Catholics, Muslims, and all forms of racism should be added too. Pelosi then replied, what's too broad about fighting hatred wherever it exists? Well, first of all, you're not fighting hatred where it exists. Your representative sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee. You have said that she is not anti-Semitic and that she did not participate in anti-Semitism, Representative Pelosi. Pelosi was specifically asked about this. She said she didn't think that Ilhan Omar's comments were intentionally anti-Semitic. What in the hell does that even mean? Intentionally anti-Semitic. What? She was walking along the street, she slipped in a puddle, and boom, she started spouting anti-Jew hatred? I know it happens to me all the time, just walking down the street. Anvil falls on my head, and suddenly I'm shouting about the KKK being great. Ilhan Omar does this stuff every 2 weeks. She can't help herself. Intentionally anti-Semitic. The intellectual dishonesty, the willingness to overlook all of this, to pander to their intersectional new faces, it's astonishing. It's astonishing. Let's be real. The real reason the New York Times didn't cover the hate crime uptick in New York City is because the purveyors were largely from minority groups, statistically speaking. They weren't going to cover that. They weren't going to cover that because for the Democrats, not all hatred is to be condemned, only hatred that affects the intersectional coalition. Only hatred that helps them coalesce their various bands of supposedly dispossessed victim groups. And Jews aren't to be included in that, even though they are the smallest of these victim groups and the most likely to be targeted by hate crimes, because that might divide the Democratic base. Intersectionality is a dangerous drug. Democrats have been taking it, and now they've OD'd. Representative John Yarmouth said, we've already voted on it. He said, whatever we do, it's going to look like we're responding specifically to her and to AIPAC. Well, it should look like you're responding specifically to Ilhan Omar. She's the one who started this. Majority Whip James Clyburn conceded some members felt Omar had been singled out for her comments. He said, of all hate, all hate, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, all that stuff. And then James Clyburn let the cat out of the bag. Then James Clyburn really let the cat out of the bag. You ready for the ugliest garbage you've ever heard from Majority Whip James Clyburn of South Carolina? You ready for this? This is from The Hill. Clyburn came to Omar's defense on Wednesday, lamenting that many of the media reports surrounding the recent controversy have omitted mentioning that Omar, who was born in Somalia, had to flee the country to escape violence and spent 4 years in a Kenyan refugee camp before coming to the United States. Her experience, Clyburn argued, is much more empirical and powerful than that of people who are generations removed from the Holocaust, Japanese internment camps during World War II, and then the other violent episodes that have marked history. I'm serious about that. There are people who tell me, well, my parents are Holocaust survivors. My parents did this. It's more personal with her, Clyburn said. I've talked to her, and I can tell you, she is living through a lot of pain. This is vile. Vile. So anti-Semitism no longer matters because you see Ilhan Omar suffered. You know who else suffered? Ayaan Hirsi Ali. You know what the left has done with Ayaan Hirsi Ali? They've othered her. They've decided that she cannot be heard. They've tried to ban her from campuses because she is anti-radical Islam. They've done that. She had the same worse experiences than Ilhan Omar. I'm not aware that Ilhan Omar was a victim of female genital mutilation as Ayaan Hirsi Ali was. Doesn't matter. Ayaan Hirsi Ali has been ousted by the Democrats and othered by the Democrats. But don't worry. Ilhan Omar can be as anti-Semitic as she wants to because who cares about the Holocaust? It happened so long ago. Now imagine for a second a Republican saying about the history of slavery. You know what? People should stop complaining that America enslaved people. They really should stop complaining about it altogether. Like, we shouldn't even mention it. And if somebody says something racist today, that is linked to the legacy of slavery. If somebody says something about enslaving black people today, that is linked to the legacy of slavery. We shouldn't, that was 150 years ago. Were you enslaved? Happened a long time ago. People on the left would be angry to suggest that because you had people who died in the Holocaust, well, you haven't suffered as, what is this, competitive suffering? This isn't about who has suffered more. This is about a person expressing open Jew hatred and James Clyburn making excuses for it because he wants to kiss Ilhan Omar's ass. This same Ilhan Omar is now saying that Israel should be boycotted because it is like Nazi Germany. And Nancy Pelosi is nowhere to be found. So this resolution compares Israel not only to Nazi Germany, but also to the Soviet Empire, to the Soviet Union, and also to, as I say, the Japanese Empire from 1937 to 1938, when the Japanese Imperial Army was busy conquering foreign lands and subjecting its population to supreme human rights depredations, including mass murder and mass rape. It's unbelievable. And Nancy Pelosi, of course, has nothing to say about it. There's your truth to power. Here's Ilhan Omar yesterday comparing BDS to the Tea Party.
We must support efforts to end the occupation and achieve two-state solution. I believe firmly that the path to peace does not lie in a violent means. This week, I introduced a resolution with civil rights leader, our colleague, John Lewis, and Rashida Tlaib, who know the importance of nonviolence movements. It recognizes the proud history of boycott movements in this country dating back to the Boston Tea Party. We should honor these movements and that history.
And then, of course, over this weekend, she proclaimed that Hamas was a nonviolent group, effectively. She said that Israel was fighting nonviolent resistors, you know, like the terrorist group Hamas that is firing rockets into the center of Israel. Again, not a word from Nancy Pelosi. So no truth to power from Nancy Pelosi. No shock there. And, of course, the Justice Democrats are promoting this. The Squad is promoting it. Their first initiative in the aftermath of this whole Trump is a bigot fight, their first move is to sponsor a bigoted resolution that Nancy Pelosi herself suggested was anti-Semitic, and Pelosi is nowhere to be found. Is it any wonder that folks think that Omar and Tlaib and AOC and Ayanna Pressley are running the show over there in the Democratic House? Is that any wonder? Because it appears they are. Nancy Pelosi's got nothing to say about this, and neither do the Democrats. Have you heard a single Democrat, mainstream Democrat, comment on Ilhan Omar? Anyone? You can't even get a mainstream Democrat to comment on an actual terror attack on an ICE facility by Antifa, let alone criticizing Ilhan Omar for her bigotry and anti-Semitism. None of them are going to do that. Now, here's the thing. There are Democrats who know that this is bad stuff, obviously. They're just being shunted off to the side. So Jake Tapper on CNN reported yesterday that Democrats are feeling squeezed by the fact that Ilhan Omar and the Squad are being given this much prominence because they're too radical, because they engage in overt bigotry on a fairly regular basis. And there are Democrats in the House going, what is all of this?
I have been spending the day talking to a lot of Democratic House members. They are very frustrated with the Squad. They are very frustrated with them for any number of reasons. You heard in the introduction, one House Democrat saying we need to be talking about bread and butter issues, not the president's tweets. But others say they don't want to be in the position of defending things that they disagree with from, say, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
Right. I mean, this is exactly what this is the position that the president and the Republican Party, who has backed him up on this, has forced Democrats into. They are painting the entire Democratic Party with the same brush.
Okay, so again, the moderate Democrats are feeling that they are being forced to embrace the radicalism of Ilhan Omar. So by yesterday, we are back to Ilhan Omar being so radical that there's an infight inside the Democratic Party. And President Trump seems as though he has moved away from his ugly statements of earlier this week about everybody going back to their home countries and that nastiness. It seems like he has moved beyond that and he has shifted his argument to instead, if you don't love the country, you can leave it, which is hackneyed and old and it's an emotional argument, but at least is not, that is voluntary. You can leave if you want, right? That's an emotional appeal. That is not send her back, right? That is not go back to your home country, get out, right? That's not the same argument quite, right? So he had shifted that argument and he was spending his day attacking Ilhan Omar for her record. And he basically two white Republican congressmen, or would it be how mean Israel is to these people in not allowing them to come? We all know the answer to this. If we were talking about Steve King and Pat Buchanan, as a representative, then this would be the story. The story would be their evil, terrible, horrible, no good, very bad beliefs. However, make these members of Congress females of color who are Muslim, and suddenly the math completely shifts, and we are not allowed to talk about any of this. There is no mainstream media coverage of any of these things. And if there is mainstream media coverage, it's about how audacious these women are, how they are raising issues that haven't been thought of before. Issues like whether Jews drink Christian blood. I mean, that is literally what the group that was sponsoring their trip has put on their website. This is where the Democrats are. They will defend anything that these women do. And they will do so if it means justifying full-on terrorism and anti-Semitism. This became fairly clear yesterday when Rich Lowry of National Review is on CNN with Peter Beinart, Representative Hamas, on CNN. So Peter Beinart writes for a bunch of publications, including The New Republic and The Nation. Peter Beinart has always been a representative of the pro-Hamas position in the Israel-Hamas, Israel-Palestinian debate. He has never seen an action by Israel that he finds appropriate. He has always justified, and he justified terrorism yesterday on CNN, on national television, in order to defend Omar and Tlaib. This is how far the left is willing to go to defend these women, specifically because they're trying to, again, grab hold of the passionate base in full acknowledge that they are alienating moderates in the process. Here's Beinart being insane.
Palestinians don't have to be saints in order to deserve the basic rights that all of us take for granted, right? Miftah has said things that I disagree with. They made an anti-Semitic statement that they apologized for.
These are strong supporters of the BDS movement. They are not honest brokers. We wouldn't afford a white nationalist organization the leeway that Peter is giving this organization. Oh, they're not saints. This is an anti-Semitic group that supported terrorism, supports blowing up innocent civilians and children. And no matter what you think of the dispute between the Palestinians and Israel, that is an illegitimate tactic that no one should associate with advocates of.
Okay, and this prompted Beinart to actually start justifying terrorism. He loses it and he starts justifying terrorism on national TV.
He's devoted her life as a nonviolent activist to opposing an oppression which none of us which does not accord with the values that any of us believe in as Americans.
So she doesn't control her own organization and what it publishes?
Rich, why don't you try spending a little bit of time focusing on the fact that almost $4 billion of U.S. aid is used to put children in detention.
You're the one distracting from the issue. I'm asking you.
This is the issue. You're distracting from the issue because National Review, just as National Review defended apartheid, and just as you defended segregation, you now defend Israel's oppression of Palestinian basic rights. It's a tradition for you guys.
Okay, then Beinart went even further, and he suggested that terrorism may be justified by the fact that Israel is oppressive. And this is what Beinart has been saying for years. I mean, I've been on CNN talking with Peter Beinart, and I've said openly that this guy represents the Hamas position. He's doing all of that because, and increasingly so are members of the Democratic Party, in order to try and make the case that Omar and Tlaib are not out of bounds. Beinart then tried to defend himself, and he said, "Today I was asked if I support Palestinian suicide bombers. God forbid, a friend was killed by one, but, how's there a but at the end of that statement? But Palestinians don't forfeit their rights because some in their midst pursue them in an immoral way. Mandela and Malcolm X endorsed violence, didn't make their oppression okay." So we're now comparing Nelson Mandela to Miftah and Palestinian terrorists? Okay, all of this to defend the evils and the horrible viewpoints and the anti-Semitism of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. In a second, we'll get to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. So Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar hold a press conference yesterday. And in this press conference, they make a bunch of anti-Semitic statements. And the Democratic Party, again, backing them to the hilt because this is the game in the Democratic Party. They will defend their radical.